Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. In today's video, I'm bringing you guys another Arnold Classic preview. These are two guys that don't seem to be in the conversation for those very top spots, but they can still get very close to that top 5 depending on what we see from either of them. In today's video, we will be comparing Antoine Vaillant and Jon DeLarosa. In terms of the versions being used today, we're using recent versions for both guys. I used Antoine's last regular show, the 2022 Chicago Pro. I could have used the 2022 Olympia version, but the lighting was awful and no one peaked properly at that event, so the Chicago Pro was the obvious choice. And for Jon, it was also an obvious choice. He placed runner-up in 2 pro shows last year, the Chicago Pro and the Tampa Pro. I would have loved to use the Chicago Pro version so we can compare two guys at the show a year apart, but the lighting was the worst at the 2023 Chicago Pro out of any other show that season. Tampa had really good lighting on the other hand, so I went with that. Anyway, that's enough preamble, let's go ahead and jump into the video. If you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button, and if you want to stay up to date on all my future Arnold Classic previews and coverage, be sure to subscribe to my channel as well. Before we get into the first pose, I do have to say sizing these guys was difficult. Jon is 5'7", at least based on what I could find on the internet. I thought he was a bit shorter though, but I went with 5'7" as my reference. But Antoine is a big guy. I knew he was taller, but it turns out he is a true 6-footer. So there's going to be some major height difference between these two, and usually with the bigger gap between heights, it is going to be harder to size these guys, but I tried my best. Anyway, in the front double, my eyes are immediately drawn to Antoine. Bigger frame, much taller, much bigger, and that's going to be a disadvantage for Jon. But I think when we start to unpack, Jon does stand a better chance than at first glance. A big advantage for Jon is his win in the outline department. He has much better lats than Antoine and a smaller waist, which gives him a better X-frame. But in the arms, I do have Antoine winning. They're taking up more real estate on his arm, they're filling in more of that gap between forearm and front delt, and he has better peaks. I also think he's a bit drier here and showing a little bit more detail. This one is tricky, this is a really powerful shot for Antoine, and he has better arms. And he would probably be really imposing next to Jon on the same stage. But Jon has a better outline, which is pretty important. I think this is competitive, but I'm going to give the win to Antoine. Does he have the better outline? No, but he is a lot bigger than Jon, and that would be even more noticeable on a real stage. And his outline wasn't exactly poor, he just doesn't have the best upper body taper. Antoine still manages to bring a tight waist. And he does have good legs too, by the way, which is probably his best area. Maybe a little too good, he's a little bottom heavy in this one if you ask me. But with his legs being a bit bigger and his waist still being somewhat tight, he can at least manage some kind of X-frame. And for a pose called the front double biceps, Antoine got the win in those biceps. Like I said, this one's competitive, but I'm going to go with the more impressive Antoine. Antoine's big structure should also help him out in the front lat spread, but he doesn't have the lats to go with it. From the waist down, he's great. Jon has some pretty good legs too, but Antoine's have cleaner separation, and the more aesthetic and appealing shape and the actual separation between those different quad muscles. Plus, he seems to be slightly drier. He has some feathering in there too, which is a nice cherry on top. But from the waist up is where Jon makes up a lot of ground. Jon has the much more thickly developed upper body in this pose. That's one advantage to having a smaller structure, it's easier to fill out and look bigger. When a taller guy doesn't fill their frame out enough, they begin to look a little lanky. That's kind of the case here. Pound for pound, Jon is looking more muscular. He wins the arms and the delts, he's a bit fuller and thicker in both of those areas. He also wins the forearms too. Jon does actually have pretty good forearms. Jon also wins in the chest. He has a much fuller and more detailed set of pecs. And like I said in the last pose, Jon still wins the lats here. They're wider, they insert lower, creating better taper, and they fill in more of the gap between his arms and torso. Look at Antoine's pose. His lats do not have that wide sweep out and end very abruptly. So again, like in the last pose, Jon ends up winning the outline department because with his subpar lats, Antoine doesn't have the taper up top to match his legs on the bottom to create a better X-frame. With Jon's better lats, tighter waist, and better taper with those things, and the solid legs, his proportions and silhouette are better. So even though this should have been another good pose for Antoine, Jon won the most important aspects of the pose, being lats and the outline, and he pulls off the upset in this one. The side chest pose is actually one of those poses where you want to have Jon's type of frame. Is he shorter? Yes. But for the side chest shot, you don't need to look super wide, so him being more narrow is downplayed. And he looks more muscular than Antoine because he's filling out more of his frame. So staying zoomed out, as a whole, Jon does score win in overall thickness from the side. He just looks much more stacked. But when we go body part for body part, Antoine makes winning just a little bit harder on Jon. In the side leg, both guys are good. They both have the mass and the hamstring drop and are pretty dry. I would give Antoine the slight win here though for having a little more lines present. Moving upstairs, I'd give Jon a win in the entire arm, including the delt. His arm looks thicker, and he definitely has the more massive delt, and he has a freaky rear delt going on as well. He also has more striations. But in the all-important pecs, I don't have Jon winning, but I don't have Antoine winning either. I think this is just a draw. The level of detail is close, and so is the actual size. I suppose if you held me at gunpoint and maybe pick a winner, I would probably pick Jon. Maybe there is a little bit more fullness and meat there, but I think it's close enough to just about be even. So this one is still pretty competitive, but like I said, Jon's structure lends itself to this pose more easily. He looks stacked and full of muscle. He's filling out his frame more. Antoine looks a little less muscular in the upper body. With Jon looking to be the thicker individual, I have to give him this pose despite no clear winner in the pecs. The rear double isn't the strongest pose for either guy. I'm kind of having trouble picking the winner. In the lower body, the guys are a-okay. It's the best part of the pose for both gentlemen. Both guys have good hams and striated glutes, but I do think Antoine is drier just by a hair. This is more or less a draw though. In the actual backs themselves, I think both guys trade off in certain areas. In the upper back, I have Antoine. He has more detail and separation between all those upper back muscles. He has more detail and the separation between all those upper back muscles is greater than Jon's. Up in this region, Antoine also wins the arms for those great bicep peaks, but Jon does win in the delts. His are notably bigger. But other than the more detailed upper back, that's where Antoine stops winning. Jon has the much better lats. Antoine's back ends very abruptly, which has to do a little with posing to be fair, but you have to be able to present yourself better. Jon's lats insert much lower, and in that lower back region where they insert, Jon gets a decisive win. Antoine doesn't have anything going on down there. He has the upper branches of a Christmas tree maybe, but that's not really in his lower back. Jon has a full Christmas tree and a little more density there too. So overall, this one has to go to Jon. Jon has the more complete back. I'm not a fan of how Antoine's ends very abruptly. And both guys were already good in the lower body, so to the one with the better, more well-rounded back goes the pose. And that's Jon, albeit I'm not exactly excited to pick a winner here. Somehow, between poses, Antoine doubled the size of his back. And yes, I know this isn't from the Chicago Pro, it's from the 2022 Vancouver Pro. No, I don't really care, this is my comparison. But anyway, Antoine is very wide now, and you know that on stage that would be very noticeable against the shorter and more narrow Mr. DeLarosa. And in terms of detail, both guys are much thicker and detailed here than in the actual rear double. Both guys have very pronounced traps and spinal erectors. And both guys are very dry and have good taper. And in the lower body, I would again just call it even. This is a pose where I'd rather be Antoine though. If I'm a taller, wider guy, I'm going to have more width, plain and simple. Now, I do think Jon has the bigger and better lats proportionally, but is that enough to stand next to Antoine? I'm not so sure. I think as of right now, he does do enough though. But on an actual stage, I have a major hunch that this would go differently. Tentatively, this pose goes to Jon with a big asterisk though. You would think that Jon would do well in this side tricep pose based on how he did in the last side pose, but I have him losing, and it's for one main reason, the tricep. I think he looks pretty stacked from the side, the delt is huge, the pecs are full, and the midsection looks tight. And in the side leg, while not as big and detailed as Antoine's, it's still very good. It's definitely good enough to win if only he had a better tricep. Jon's tricep isn't taking up enough real estate on his arms, and the branches of his horseshoe are fairly skinny. Antoine is easily winning the tricep, and like I said, he wins in the side leg. I'm not a big fan of the execution, it's not doing anything for me. Nothing really happens in the torso. He's not showing off the abs or the obliques or trying to make his pecs look any thicker, but just in the tricep alone, he does all he needs to do to win this pose. Heading into the abs and thighs, I thought this would be an open-shut case for Antoine, but I do think Jon exceeds my own expectations. His quads look really good here and really wide. I still prefer Antoine because he's a bit drier and he has that feathering, and I do like the way his quads actually separate, but nonetheless, neither guy is a slouch in the quads. And shifting our gaze upstairs, no one is dropping the ball in the abs either. So with good abs and thighs, I honestly think I'd be happy with anyone winning, but I do prefer Antoine. This is mainly for the abs. I think his midsection is a bit tighter, the stomach is slightly flatter, the abs are a bit blockier in a good way, and the obliques are coming out more for him. Both guys are really good here. Jon definitely doesn't lose per se, but I just prefer Antoine. In the most muscular, yes, I am again using the Vancouver Pro for Antoine. It's still recent, I just wanted to use this one because I wanted to compare apples to apples. I wanted both guys to be hitting their main most muscular hands clasped. Now going back to what I was saying for the side shots, Jon's structure lends itself to these types of poses. The most muscular is obviously about looking like the most muscular individual. Is Antoine several inches taller and outweighing Jon? Yes. But does Antoine outmuscle him? No, Jon is right there in terms of pound for pound muscularity. For having more frame to fill out though, Antoine doesn't look behind. I think both guys measure up quite closely in terms of muscularity. What about detail? Again, things are fairly even. There is a lot different lighting between these two photos now though. Antoine seems a bit drier, which seemed to be a common theme throughout this comparison, and I see more striations in his delts and his quads compared to Jon. So I would probably give him the victory in that department, but by a slim margin. What about body part for body part? In the legs, I again like Antoine more. It just comes down to me liking the way his quads actually insert. I like that look a lot more. I think both guys are bringing great abs. I think in the chest it's about even, but in the arms and delts, else, I do prefer Antoine. I like the way the triceps are flexed and how the bicep peaks are still peaks, but are also very thick. In the delts, now Antoine is the one with the more capped appearance. You can definitely throw the traps in there for Antoine as well. And finally, Antoine does win the all-important width aspect. So overall, I do think both guys in this comparison with solid most musculars, but I'm giving the edge to Antoine on this one. I think that because these guys are close in terms of muscularity, the bigger, taller guy wins. If you can look just as muscular but are taller, wider, bigger in general, and have a touch more detail, that's enough to break the tie. So to round this comparison out, Antoine wins the most muscular. Alright, if you take a look at my scorecard here, you can see that these guys were so competitive that they actually tied in the mandatories. Antoine won the front doubles, side try, abs and thighs, and the most muscular. Jon won the front lat spread, the side chest, and both back poses. So on paper, these guys are evenly matched. But let's step outside the scorecard and consider other things to break this tie. Let's consider the three main categories bodybuilding is judged on: aesthetic/shape, conditioning, and of course muscularity. For conditioning, I think both guys are definitely close enough that no one is really losing this area. But I think Antoine was just a hair sharper. I noted that several times throughout this comparison, so I'm giving Antoine an ever so slight victory in this column. In terms of aesthetics, this is an interesting one. Antoine had the wider waist, but at the same time the better midsection, but also the worst taper and X-frame. But Jon isn't exactly a work of art either. I think both guys are more in line with the typical bodybuilder look. On the other hand, the height and the more pleasing muscle bellies complement Antoine's physique. I do slightly prefer Antoine's look, so he gets another small win here. Now in terms of muscularity, the tables turn and I'm giving Jon a small win. But like I said, in shots like the side chest and most muscular, Antoine being so big is going to hurt Jon. It cuts into Jon's margin on this one because who cares if you're the most muscular when there is someone just as muscular next to you, but someone who is a lot bigger in height, width, and overall mass. But Jon has helped out a little bit in this department by completeness, which does account for something in this muscularity department, just like muscularity and overall muscle count. They're all components of this. But we'll talk more about flaws and completeness very shortly. So I do think Jon gets a small win here in the muscularity department, but Antoine ultimately wins this round by winning the other two categories of conditioning and aesthetics. The last thing I want to consider is the completeness and the flaws of each individual. And like I said, I do think Jon has the most well-rounded physique. Neither guy really has any major flaws, injuries, major gaps, anything like that. But Antoine's back was definitely a little underdone. It cost him in the rear double, definitely, and I think the only way he could win the rear lat spread would be because he would be the wider guy in general, not because his back is better than Jon's. Jon's only weakness was a smaller tricep, and I don't think that is as important as the back. Other than those things, these guys were free from any gaps, but I would give this whole completeness/flaws category to Jon. And that brings us back to breaking the tie. In the mandatories, it was a tie. In the three main judging criteria, Antoine won. And in the completeness/flaws category, Jon scored a win. So the final thing I want to point out is what you guys think about this matchup. I asked you guys who you have placing higher on the day of the contest, and it's fairly close. But Antoine did win this poll with roughly 59%. So do I agree? No. I think Jon wins on being a little more thickly muscled and being more complete. Antoine lagging behind in the back was the deciding factor for me. And since the conditioning was relatively the same, Jon's extra muscle and completeness pulled him over the finish line. Now on stage, this absolutely can be different. Antoine is looking improved in his most recent updates for sure. All he needs is a little more size throughout the upper body and he is set. And he already has that height and size advantage over Jon. And that was the biggest what if for me in this comparison. On stage, right next to each other, Antoine may be too much for Jon to fend off. So honestly, for my final prediction, I'm about 55-45 on Jon placing higher. I'm only slightly more confident in Jon because even though Antoine will be bigger than him, Jon is more complete and a little more muscled. It will be interesting to see both guys next to each other, but as of right now, in this comparison, Jon DeLarosa is today's winner. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. Do you agree with my analysis? Do you think Jon is going to get dwarfed on stage? Do you think Antoine needs better balance? Leave me your thoughts down in the comments. By the way, if you guys are looking for any high quality supplements, the ones I use personally, head over to armsracenutrition.com. And at checkout, be sure to use my code PROJECT10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code PROJECT10 at armsracenutrition.com. If you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit that like button. And if you guys want to stay up to date on all my future Arnold Classic previews, subscribe to my channel for more. Finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Gotta get that Lexi, yeah.